I never expected a mission to end in silence, and yet, that morning, that understanding came to me not in an explosion or a clamor, but in the stillness after the alarms faded, in the quietness that followed the collapse of certainty. My name is Captain Sarah Walker, and this is the story of how 104 days alone in a war-torn wilderness reshaped every belief I had about fear, survival, humanity, and the meaning of hope. We started with standard orders. We always do. Confident skies, calculated flight paths, a mission brief that promised minimal risk. But in war, there is no such thing as minimal risk, only degrees of danger that you convince yourself aren't real until they are, and then they become all you can think about. The first sign that something was off didn't come as a bang or a flash. It came as an uneasy pause in the radio traffic, static where there should have been reassurance, a slight hitch in the usual rhythm of communication that set my nerves on alert. We were inside hostile territory, but our intel had assured minimal resistance, that the enemy forces were scattered and preoccupied, that support was nearby if needed. When we crossed the low clouds into open visibility, the ground looked barren and silent. But war is not always loud. It hides, it nests, it waits for you to lower your guard. It began with one sensor reading on the wing that flickered and stabilized, the kind of minor glitch pilots are trained to interpret calmly. But when the second and third readings started showing conflicting reports, my co-pilot and I exchanged a look that didn't require words. Aviation is a language of instinct and experience, and that look said, "This isn't normal." The alarms clicked into life, a cascade of red lights and warning tones that didn't make sense with our situation. And then a quiet, cold understanding spread through the cockpit. Something was wrong from the inside, not outside. I reached for the microphone, intending to call the tower, but static was all that answered. No signal, nothing. And that's when the indicators began to fail. Systems going offline one by one, as if an unseen hand were pulling them out of the network, one after another until the instruments turned silent. We were flying blind. And in that moment, without data and without guidance, you realize how much you take for granted. Altitude, direction, speed, all calculated by machines that you hadn't really questioned until they disappeared. My co-pilot and I jumped into manual mode, instinct taking over where instruments once guided us, and the plane began a slow, painful descent to a patch of flatter land that might have been a field once, a place where we might survive impact rather than succumb to it. We braced ourselves as the fuselage shook, responding to the wind and gravity in ways that elicited tension in every muscle of my body. But the worst moment wasn't the descent. It was the landing, jarring and uneven, but controlled in a way that pushed us forward out of danger and into the realm of survival. When the dust settled and we took stock of each other, the first thing I noticed were the eyes, wide, confused, uncertain. Not panic, not despair, just uncertainty mixed with the beginnings of survival instinct. And as I checked the perimeter and tended to injuries that were more bruises and shock than anything else, we tried to reach command again. And that's when the real silence hit. Not static, not fail, real silence. No response. On the fourth day, a message finally came, not from the field command or the rescue teams we expected, but from headquarters. It wasn't a mission update. It wasn't reassurance. It was a decision. Our mission was terminated. Rescue would not be attempted. They cited strategic risk, prioritization of resources, and unrecoverable zones. They used words like protocol and strategy, but translation was simple. We were left behind. That phrase settled over us like a fog that refused to lift. But I realized in that quiet moment that abandonment and irrelevance are different things. You can be left behind physically, but spiritually, mentally, you change the meaning of that abandonment by what you choose to do next. I looked at my crew, and saw the flicker of that realization ignite within them. Clarity in crisis is rare, and we needed that clarity like water in a desert. We salvaged what we could from the wreck: medkits, rations, water purification strips, personal supplies, communication batteries, all packed away with meticulous care. We created a list of priorities, not because someone told us to, but because we chose to survive. We assessed shelter, hydration, food sources, and then aligned our minds with the logic of survival, day by day, choice by choice. The first week was disorienting. Nights were cold and long, filled with the chorus of unfamiliar wilderness sounds that seemed to creep closer in the dark. Days were hot and unforgiving, and the sun beat down on us like an indifferent judge. I learned to interpret the angle of shadows as a clock, to remember the taste of water sources as indicators of safety, to differentiate between edible plants and those that would bring illness. And every morning I woke up with a sense of purpose, a determination that built itself not from hope of rescue, but from habit of survival. Day 21 arrived with a sandstorm that came out of nowhere, a wall of grit and wind that buried our shelter and forced us into huddles that taught us a lot about endurance. I could feel the sand pressing against my helmet like a test of patience, yet in all that chaos was a strange calm. We were alive, together, breathing through it, because we had already chosen survival as our focus. By day 40, the initial adrenaline had faded, replaced by a routine that was strangely rhythmic: wake, hydrate, forage, rest, set watch. But the human mind isn't designed to reduce itself to routine alone. It wants meaning, context, narrative. So I began reminding everyone of small victories: spots of shade found, edible roots identified, water encountered that sustained us rather than dehydrated us. These moments became our milestones, the seasons of our survival narrative. Then came day 78, when smoke appeared on the horizon like a signal from another world. I remember it clearly because I saw something shift in the squad, that exact moment where hope intersected with reason. We didn't run toward it blindly. We approached cautiously, with layered steps, awareness of potential danger and preparation for anything. And as we grew closer, what we saw wasn't a rescue party, but an abandoned ranger outpost, a structure with supplies, ration caches, emergency water, and tools left by someone who chose a departure we couldn't yet understand. That discovery was a turning point. We were not rescued yet, but we had resources that expanded our survival capacity. We rested, quarantined our strength, and took time to understand what that outpost meant. It didn't solve everything, but it solved a lot. And from there we planned, not for rescue, not for waiting, but for movement. You see, survival isn't static. It isn't about enduring in one place. It's about movement, adaptability, and intention. On day 90, the decision was unanimous. We would travel toward the nearest known checkpoint if possible. With every step, the wilderness felt less like an enemy and more like a teacher. I found renewed strength in the rise of my own heartbeat, in the disciplined steps we took together, in the way we helped each other over rough terrain, through arid plateaus and shaded ravines. We became a unit, not just stranded crew, but a group reborn with a mission of survival that we defined for ourselves. Then, on day 104, the sound that changed everything wasn't a storm or an explosion or even a radio. It was the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. A patrol team appeared just beyond a ridge, their wheels stirring dust that danced in the sunlight like fragments of hope. We didn't collapse. We didn't cry. We simply stood, the weight of every day carried in our posture, and as they approached, their eyes widening in recognition of our presence, I felt the entire journey crystallize into a moment of truth. We were alive. When rescue finally came, it wasn't the moment of relief I had once imagined. It was deeper. It was the emotional culmination of months of choice, strength, adaptation, and perseverance. I walked toward them with a quiet sense of acceptance, not just of survival, but of transformation. Survival had become more than a biological state. It became identity. And so, if you're hearing this, if you're facing challenge, abandonment, or a moment where every expectation seems to have vanished, know this: your survival is not defined by those who left you behind, but by how firmly you decide to stand and walk forward anyway. If you've ever had to choose to keep going when the world told you to stop, comment below with 104 days strong, because your story matters too. And human resilience above all is worth remembering.